So tonight I'm gonna talk about wild and scenic rivers in Oregon, and it's something I put a lot of time into studying and learning about. And before I get started, I do love questions, partially because if I know the answer, it makes me feel smart, and that's important to me. But also, if I don't know the answer, it makes me go learn it. And so please, if you have questions in the chat, please add them, and at the end, or just type in and ask them later on. It's what makes it fun for me. So please ask questions if you can think of something. Hold on, my computer is not moving. There we go. So the big news that happened last week, I think that was last week, 2 weeks ago, were that Senator Wyden and Senator Merkley proposed the River Democracy Act, which added 4,700 miles of Oregon rivers to the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act, which will add 4,700 miles. It's amazing legislation. And just to put that in perspective, these are the other acts that have added wild and scenic rivers in Oregon. The first one in 1968, the original act added the Rogue, and the next one was the Snake in Hell's Canyon, and S416 added the Rogue and the Oahe. And back then, rivers were added to the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act, just like one at a time. And then Senator Hatfield got through the Omnibus Wild and Scenic Rivers Act, which was groundbreaking because it was 40 at once. And it quickly took Oregon to the top. Like we quickly had, I think at that point, we did have the most wild and scenic rivers, or we were pretty close. And a few more were added one at a time. And in 2009, there was a bill that added 9 more. The Oregon Caves expansion added 1. And the most recent act, the Dingle Act, added 10. So now there's 68 wild and scenic rivers in Oregon, which is a lot. If you look at the states we know, Oregon has the most number of rivers with 68. The most number is California with 41. So we easily have the most. But Oregon has the second most number of miles. Alaska has 3,210, which is the most miles. Oregon is second with 2,173. But we have a higher concentration. So, in California and Alaska, they have 1% of their miles, river miles, wild and scenic. Here we have 2. This bill that Senator Wyden has introduced takes that percentage to 6%. This isn't a small act. This is massive. This is the biggest piece of wild and scenic legislation ever even considered, right? And we'll blow by Alaska in miles, and we'll be the wild and scenic. We already are the wild and scenic state, but it will really take it to a new level. And just to give some perspective, these are all the wild, this map is, I think, around 2016-ish, something like that. This is what wild and scenic rivers look like across the country. And you can see there's not a whole lot in the East or the Midwest. And one of the reasons for that is there's way more private property on the East Coast, and it's hard to make private rivers that go through private property wild and scenic. Where on the West Coast, we have more public lands, and it's easier to designate rivers on public lands as wild and scenic. And just as a close-up, you can see, this is back when we had 58. We have 10 more since this map was done. It's the biggest concentration. This is the biggest concentration of wild and scenic rivers anywhere. And the place that I love and that I spend the most time, although I live in Hood River, and you can see there's a bunch of rivers up there, my heart is sort of in Northern California and Southern Oregon. So that whole section from the Trinity up to the Elk is, to me, the most special collection of rivers in the world. They're unique. They're unique to the world. There's something just amazing for a lot of reasons. I'm not going to get into it, but it's a real special collection of rivers. And this new act adds a lot more to what's already down there. So what I want to do today is talk about the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act, just kind of talk about the nuts and bolts. If you already know this might bore you, but this is just some stuff I feel like everybody should know. So this is sort of like eating our vegetables. And then we'll look through a bunch of photos of some wild and scenic rivers throughout Oregon, just to get perspective. And a lot of us have seen signs like this. It means a river is wild and scenic river. It doesn't mean the entire river is, it just means that segment of the river is. So when you designate a river as wild and scenic, you're not designating the whole river from start to finish. You're designating a particular some section of miles, right? It could be 3 miles, it could be 10 miles. And a few examples, it's the entire river from start to finish. A good example is the Salmon River that comes off Mount Hood. That whole thing is wild and scenic. And there's only a handful where the whole thing are. To even be considered as wild and scenic, two things have to happen. The river has to be free flowing, not the river necessarily. The section of river has to be free flowing, which means no dams. It can have small low head dams, like some really small dams are actually okay, but it can't have dams on that section. It can have dams upstream that control the flow, but not on that section. And it has to contain at least one outstandingly remarkable value. And I think, to me, the outstandingly remarkable values are sort of the key to the act in a lot of ways. And in the bill, they're defined as outstandingly remarkable scenic, recreational, geologic, fish and wildlife, historical, cultural, or other similar. And the or other similar opens up a whole bunch more. There's actually probably, I'm just guessing, like 50 different outstandingly remarkable values out there. It could be, there's one that's traditional lifestyles, which is a river where basically, because there are cowboys there, that's a reason it's outstanding and remarkable, and it's a reason the river is protected. And so there has to be at least one of these values. And to be designated wild and scenic, it either takes an act of Congress, or if the river has a state designation, the governor can ask the Secretary of Interior to do it without Congress, which doesn't happen very often. But that's an alternate pathway to make it happen. And then once the river is protected, whether it's through Congress or through that other pathway, that section of river can't have dams anymore. And this protection was really important after the bill was passed, because we were damming a lot of our rivers. So it stopped a lot of dams that could have happened. These rivers, some rivers being designated wild and scenic. And those outstandingly remarkable values that I talked about, whatever they are, they're the botany, they're wildlife, they're the cowboys, the agencies, and when I say the agencies, typically the Forest Service and the BLM, but there's other agencies in the government like the Fish and Wildlife Service, and there's others that can manage our wild and scenic rivers, but it's mostly the Forest Service and BLM. They have to write a management plan to specifically protect those outstandingly remarkable values. And, you know, a good example is on the Rogue River, recreation is one of the values, right? So there's the management plan was written to protect recreation. And that's why we have the permit system we have today. A lot of the permit systems are because the management plan has to protect some of the values. A lot of the permit systems were dictated because the river is designated wild and scenic. And the other cool thing, the interesting thing is, it's called the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act, but it should almost be called the Wild or Scenic or Recreational Act. Because although a river technically gets the stamp wild and scenic, it gets segmented into sections that are wild and some sections that are scenic and some sections that are recreational, and they don't overlap. So on the Rogue is a really good example, because the section that we raft from Grave Creek to about Foster Bar, there's no roads. That's a wild river. It has a wild designation. And then upstream was a road paralleling the river. It has a recreational designation because there's a road right next to it. And then downstream of Foster Bar, well, there's a road kind of up and above the river looking down on it, but not right next to it. It gets the scenic designation. So the whole river is a wild and scenic river, but different segments of it get subdivided into these different classifications. So that's just wild and scenic rivers in a nutshell. That's the basics, stuff that I think is important to understand. I want to just look at some of my favorite wild and scenic rivers and talk about what makes them special. And I want to start with the Grand Ronde. The Grand Ronde is an amazing river trip. It's stunning, as you can see, that it's not hard. It's a class 2, but it's a river that starts in the Wallowa Mountains and ends up at the Snake River. This is the Imnaha. This is the one I was mentioned earlier, where it's protected in part because of cowboys being there. That's a great oversimplification, but it's kind of one of the 5 outstandingly remarkable values. And the Imnaha flows out of the Wallowas also, and through this really cool canyon. And there's a trail next to it. You can hike the trail if you want, down to the Snake. And the Snake is also a wild and scenic river as well. It was the second one designated in Oregon on the Oregon-Idaho border. This is a little known one. This is Eagle Creek. There's at least three Eagle Creeks in Oregon. There's the one we all know of in the Hood River Gorge with the big waterfalls. That one is not wild and scenic. There's two that are. This is the first one. This flows out of the southern end of the Wallows. And next is the Oahe and the Steens, kind of the southeast corner of Oregon. Here's the classic Oahe River and Iron Point Canyon. And this is the North Fork of the Oahe. The North Fork starts in Idaho in the Oahe Mountains, and it's in wilderness all through Idaho, and then it crosses the border into Oregon and it leaves wilderness. That's about 9 miles down to the Oahe River at Three Forks. This is the Donner und Blitzen, and a river I became obsessed with because I thought the name was cool. And all of the rivers off the Steens, most of the rivers, the creeks off the Steens, drain down into the Donner und Blitzen, which flows through I guess that'd be the north end of Steens Mountain. And it only has water maybe to paddle like 5 days of the year. You have to get super lucky to even find water to paddle it. It's usually pretty low. And all the tributaries off the Steens, this is Big Indian Creek. This is also designated as a wild and scenic river. This is Wild Horse Canyon. That flows off the north end, and Kiger Creek that flows off the south end. And then the Willamette Valley, where I'm sure a lot of you are pretty familiar with. I'm not as familiar with the Willamette Valley. I've done some paddling. This is the North Fork of the Middle Fork of the Willamette. Right here, a lot of you probably know this section. This isn't the big Class 5 Miracle Mile section. This is the fun section downstream. This is Quartzville Creek, just a classic one, as I'm sure you all know. Here's the Clackamas, the Upper Clackamas. An amazing river so close to a city is a pretty rare thing. And the Clackamas on its own as a drainage is a wild and scenic mecca. There's so many tributaries of the Clackamas that are also wild and scenic. This is Fish Creek. That's Bob Mosier, who organizes the Upper Clackamas Whitewater Festival, paddling with Stuckey down Fish Creek. Here's the Kallawash, the largest tributary of the Clackamas, and there's a couple of Class 4 or 5 sections on it, but there's also some really delightful Class 3 on the Kallawash just above where it meets the Clackamas. And then Roaring River flows through the Roaring River Wilderness, and it's one of those where you got to pack up your stuff and kind of bushwhack down to get to this beautiful little tributary of the Clackamas. And a lot of you know the Clackamas. There's a Roaring River Rapid, I believe. I don't know the Upper Clackamas as well as I should, but you'll see it come in on River Right when you're paddling down the Upper Clackamas. And if you like bushwhacking down to small creeks, this one's delightful. Also, this is the other Eagle Creek that I know of. This is Eagle Creek that flows into the Clackamas. There's some lower sections of it that you can paddle that are roadside, and there's bridge access, but you can also hike up into the wilderness and paddle a creek that's like this, that's a Class 4 with the occasional log here and there, if you don't mind dealing with that kind of nonsense. But a stunning creek. This is right in my backyard, Mount Hood. Here, this is the Zigzag River, and the Zigzag River starts on the Zigzag Glacier on the south side of Mount Hood. And it's one you would hike to. I'm not sure if anybody's ever paddled it. I think there's a section a few people have bushwhacked down, but it's pretty rare to paddle the Zigzag. This is the Salmon River, an example of a river that is designated wild and scenic from its headwaters of Mount Hood all the way down to where it meets the Sandy, and known as the Everest of kayaking, of Oregon kayaking, because it has some massive waterfalls upstream. But the lower section has some great Class 2, 3, and it's a great place to go for a hike, really close to Portland. This is the White River. This starts on the south side of Mount Hood and flows into the Deschutes. And the entire White River is designated wild and scenic, except for the part by Celestial Falls. Celestial Falls is not wild and scenic. And that's a whole other story I'm not going to get into, but the whole river except for Celestial Falls is designated wild and scenic. This is the upper East Fork of the Hood. If you've ever driven to Mount Hood Meadows from the Hood River, you look down at this little tributary. It's a very continuous, really section where things go wrong sometimes. And then Central Oregon is another mecca of rivers. It's unbelievable how much is there, wild and scenic rivers. This isn't the Blue Mountains. This is the North Powder. And a section of it is why you can't even see the river there. It's not very big. Just looking down on it, it's just this small little river with, like, I would say 100 logs every mile crossing it. And it's partially protected. One of its values, outstandingly remarkable values, is recreation. And it's specifically a four-wheel drive road that goes next to it. So one of the reasons this river is protected is for people to use a four-wheel drive road as recreation, which I think is pretty interesting. This is White's Creek that flows through the town of Sisters and starts up in the, is it the South Sisters Wilderness? I think it starts at the South Sister and then flows down by the town of Sisters. And it has water all summer. It's really unique creek. Here's the Crooked, an amazing section of whitewater. Here we're floating through Smith River State Park. And this is the biggest rapid. This is it's called No Name. It has a name, and the name is No Name. But it's a pretty big class 5-ish rapid on the Crooked. This is another river that only flows 4 or 5 days a year. And it's a pretty big adventure to run it because the put in and take out are really challenging, but well worth doing if you get the chance and have the ability. And then south of Bend, there's some really cool little creeks that go through meadow-like areas in this high desert. One of them is Big Marsh Creek. The other one's the Little Deschutes and Crescent Creek, which are all designated wild and scenic. And then finally is the place it's hard to say a river is my favorite river. It's hard to be like, this is the one I love the most, or this region I love the most, but I really do love this place the most. I saved it for last. A lot of us are familiar with the Rogue, one of the original wild and scenic rivers, and special to us for a lot of reasons. But it's pretty rare to have a place we can have reliable flows on a multi-day trip in the summer. And that's one of the reasons that it's special. This is the River Styx. It's the only subterranean wild and scenic river. It's in a cave. It goes to Oregon Caves National Monument. And it was the one in my chart earlier. It was part of the Oregon Caves expansion. I think it was 2014. And so Senator Wyden worked on this one as well. This is the North Fork of the Smith in California. And so we're not in Oregon anymore. We're in California. But one interesting thing about the Smith River in California is they designated the main rivers. There's a North Fork, Middle Fork, and South Fork, but also pretty much every tributary that goes into those is also wild and scenic. So I think of the Smith as like an oak tree because it's really close to the ocean, but every branch off the Smith is also designated wild and scenic. I think it's 297 miles of rivers protected. The whole watershed was protected. Except, and even this is Stony Creek. This is a tributary to North Fork of the Smith. This is protected as wild and scenic through that protection. This is the North Fork of the Smith in Oregon. So it starts in Oregon and flows into California. Now they were separate designations, usually wild and scenic, that like a state senator or a US senator from a state won't designate a river from a different state. So when they did this, the designation of the main Smith River in California, which actually wasn't even done by a senator, but I'm not going to go into that. It cut it off at the boundary. They only did the parts in California. And so the North Fork of the Smith in Oregon was designated separately, but they didn't get the tributaries. So earlier I showed you, right, Stony Creek flows into the North Fork of the Smith. It was designated. The North Fork Smith, the main stem is protected, but its tributaries like Baldface Creek weren't. And Baldface Creek is special for a lot of reasons. One of them is just has amazing fish habitat. And it's the headwaters of the famous Smith River and is very deserving of protection. This is one of the rivers in Senator Wyden's bill to be protected, and one that's very deserving of protection because it's also threatened by nickel mining based on its geology. Another one of my favorites we talked about at the beginning of, before everybody got here, was the Chetco. To do the upper section of the Chetco, it's a 10-mile hike in, and it's brutal. This is my friend AJ, and I remember him being pretty tired, and we're only about halfway there. But one of the cool things about the Kalmiopsis are the botany, and one of the outstandingly remarkable values of the Chetco is its botany. So again, one of the reasons, another way to put it, one of the reasons the Chetco was protected was because of its outstanding botany. This is the Kalmiopsis leachiana, the flower that the Kalmiopsis wilderness was named after. Here we are paddling on the Chetco. There's just fun, steep little drops. It's a really fun river. That is the clearest river I've ever seen anywhere. It sometimes feels like you're not even on water. Like you really feel like you're floating. It's to me uncomparable. And it's been burned a lot. The Biscuit Fire was the first burn. I think it was 2002. More recently by the Chetco Bar Fire. And the whole river doesn't look like this, but the upper stretches do. And to me, it doesn't take away from the beauty. Like there's something really cool about this to me. And it's still, that you can see down by the river, it's still green. And it hasn't affected the water quality. This photo was taken, I think, a year after the Chetco Bar Fire, maybe 2 years at most. But you can see the whole area burns, but the river is still crystal clear. And that's one of the special things about the Chetco, is it's clear water. Here we are. That it's not all fun in there. It's a lot of work. We're portaging one of the rapids. It's a pretty brutal trip. I would say only half the people that do it actually have anything close to fun. And here's the Chetco. We were talking earlier. This is the Chetco below Tolman Ranch. This is the first camp past Tolman Ranch. The camp's on the right. So that's Sandware on the right. Next is the Illinois, and this photo to me sums up the Illinois, because the Illinois, again, it's about the plants. There's just so much diversity of plants and flowers, and the river. You can see the river. There's rapids. There's great whitewater on the Illinois. You can even see almost the clarity of the water from here. But this place is special for so many reasons. It's a very famous whitewater trip with really fun rapids, but really something special. Now we're in the headwaters of Illinois. This is Rough and Ready Creek. It's my friend Nate looking down on the North Fork of Rough and Ready Creek. This is sort of where the Illinois starts. There is an East Fork and a West Fork, but to me, the Rough and Ready Creek is the headwaters of the Illinois River. And it's also unprotected. It's like Baldface Creek into the North Fork of the Smith. Rough and Ready Creek, which is an upper tributary of the Illinois, is not protected. And because of that brown rock you see, that's a serpentine. It's high in nickel and chromium. There are people that want to go in and mine this area, strip mine it for nickel and chromium. So protecting it is especially important. And it's like rafting on Mars. It's so cool. I paddled the lower section of it 2 days ago when I was down in Southern Oregon, and there's just like nothing you've ever done, unless you've done the North Fork of the Smith, because it's similar to that. It's that same rock, that peridotite. It's something really special. This is Josephine Creek. This is another tributary of the Illinois, but also unprotected. It's where gold was discovered in Oregon, and there's been a lot of mining up here. A miner has been telling me that every rock's been turned over here 3, 4, 5 times. It's been mined a lot for gold and platinum as well. And miners still go in here every summer and mine during mining season. But a huge concentration of Darlingtonia, California, the pitcher plants, a lot of you may know about, the carnivorous plant that's on a lot of the rivers down here. The Indigo Creek. Indigo Creek is another tributary of the Illinois, also unprotected. Here we're hiking from Bear Camp. So those of you that know the Rogue, there's some dirt roads off Bear Camp that take you to the end of a dirt road, and you can hike down into Indigo. And when you're driving back from the Rogue on Bear Camp, a lot of the right side out your window is looking, and it's crux of the whole trip, dealing with this fiasco. But beyond this, it's just a really fun adventure with like beautiful clean lines, canyon. People have been able to paddle. It's really hard to catch water in here when Bear Camp's also open. That's sort of the trick of paddling it. This is Priscilla, who I think gave a presentation a couple of weeks ago, paddling the bigger drops. And here we are. That was the last one. Was the East Fork of Indigo Creek. Here we're on the main stem. And if there was road access to this, it would be, on everybody's to-do list, right? It's stunning whitewater and a stunning canyon, but also unprotected. The very bottom part has a little bit of protection, but as a whole, this creek is unprotected. And I love this photo so much. This to me defines kayaking. Just people hanging out together, stairs to drops, boat scouting. This just gets me excited about what kayaking is all about. So I just want to finish up by sharing like why I love rivers. For me, come my life, and a lot of my friends have come from boating, and they're special to everybody for different reasons. Some people feel rivers are important because of fish. Some people for clean drinking water. Some people just because reasons to love rivers. It's about people that are truly happy and being with people. To me, like you don't see smiles like this anywhere but on a river trip, and it's something special to me. And people just kind of let loose and have fun, and you make such good friends on trips like this, before, during, and after. Really brings families together, and makes me do things I would not do at home. This is the cookie game where you put peanut butter on a cookie on your forehead and let it slide down your face till you can eat it, and it's a race. The only place I ever do this is on a river trip, and it just takes you to places you wouldn't otherwise go. If the Grand Ronde wouldn't have existed, I'd have no reason to personally to visit this part of Oregon. But not just for paddling, but here we are on the Mackenzie Bike Trail. Rivers bring us to just bike and be together outside. So there's something that's special to me for, again, the happiness that they bring, and just the camaraderie and a reason to get out with friends. So just to finish up, here we are in Illinois. My friends got engaged an hour before we took this photo, and we didn't find out for a few days. But this is an amazing place to get engaged. So I want to leave you with something to think about. If you do want to support Senator Wyden's bill, or you want to do anything, you have any ideas for whether it's river protection or social justice, or you want to build a nuclear plant, whatever you believe in, I don't know, whatever it is, but hopefully it's for rivers. And I'm not suggesting building nuclear plants. That was just an example. But things you can do to actually move the needle, it's amazing. A lot of people get jaded about Congress and about our government, but we can actually make a difference. It's like so crazy. Like we can do these things, and it changes policy as individuals. And so I'd urge you, if you want to make a difference on anything, and specifically maybe Senator Wyden's bill, here are some things you can do. And so one of them, social media, tagging your senator or representative and thanking them for something that they've done that you like, or suggesting they do something, makes a small difference. Twitter, for some reason, politicians are really into right now. I know Senator Wyden really cares about tweets. I mean, I have a Twitter account just so I can thank Senator Wyden on a regular basis for the things he does that I appreciate. So I urge you to, if you don't have Twitter, maybe get it and then just tweet to him. He'd like it. He'd feel like you're supporting him. You can email your senators and representatives. They don't all read them, but they get counts on what they're about. You can write them a letter, and we're going in order of how difficult it is, because the more difficult it is, the more impact it makes. But a paper letter, you could handwrite it and add a photo of a place. That has an impact on a representatives. A phone call, you can Google their offices and call them. We're supposed to call them. And the first time I called a senator, I thought he was going to answer, and I was really nervous. But it was just like his 25-year-old intern who took the call. It was super polite, and I felt really good at the end. And I'd urge you to do it. It's really not that hard. And again, they add those phone calls up, and it does move the needle. They all have local offices. I know, it depends on geographically in Oregon. They don't have them everywhere, but you can actually go to the local offices. They're not typically there, but people will listen to you. If you want to write an op-ed or an LTE, letter to the editor for a paper, that's a great way. I know our senators typically and our representatives read them. If their name is mentioned, they read the whole thing. And it's a great way to get their attention. A letter to the editor is just 1 to 3 paragraphs that anybody can write. An op-ed is something you typically are an expert for some reason, whether you're a scientist. I'm a business owner, so I can write from that perspective. Maybe you're, I don't know, you're an Instagram star for fishing, whatever it is. If you're an expert, it's easier to get published as an op-ed. And you just Google a paper and you just Google op-ed statesman journal, for example, and it sends you to a page that tells you how to submit these things, and they're really powerful. And then finally, you can go to DC. Like, you can buy a suit or a dress and get on a plane and get an overpriced hotel room and make an appointment with your representatives. And they don't usually meet you. Like, Senator Wyden won't typically be there to greet you, but by you showing up there makes a big impact. It shows you really care about this topic. Here I am meeting with Congressman Walden. He was nice enough to meet with me a few times. And although we didn't share the same politics on a lot of things, I really appreciated him listening. And it meant a lot to me to be able to tell him things. And I was able to share my favorite rivers with him. And he listened intently. And he told me stories about what the things he did to protect the streams. He was really involved in protecting the Donner and Blitzen and actually not Donner and Blitzen, but Wild Horse and Kiger and a lot of other stuff. He was involved in the Steens Mountain Protection Act. So hearing his stories of things he did was really interesting to me. So with that, oh, one more thing. The other thing you can do, the easiest thing, is join a conservation group. And so joining a conservation group like American Whitewater, or these are just examples, Oregon Wild, KS Wild in Southern Oregon, is a way you can give them your voice. So if you don't want to do anything, you can just join American Whitewater for 35 bucks. And they certainly appreciate the 35 bucks, but that's not how they're staying afloat. But what they need is to say, we represent 5,000 paddlers or 1,000 paddlers or 100,000 paddlers. So the more people they represent, the more power they have when they go to advocate on our behalf. So if you believe in the mission of one of these organizations, you could become a member and give them sort of your proxy to advocate for things on behalf of you. I have to say, American Whitewater is excellent on every level. If you're a paddler, I just feel like you should be a member if you care about rivers and stuff. And then in the industry, the outfitting, the second tier there are outfitting groups that we have that we also advocate for protection of rivers as well. So if you want to connect with me, I have an Instagram and a Twitter @ZCollier. I'd always appreciate having followers and likes and stuff. For Twitter, for me, I'm trying to build more Twitter followers, because then when I tweet to Senator Wyden or somebody else, that counts more, I hope. I don't know for sure, but I'm trying to become personally a better Twitter user so that I can have more of an impact when I share things with our representatives. I think that's my last slide. So that's it. Hopefully I didn't talk too fast. And I do love questions. So if anybody has questions, please let me know.
Well, as people are pondering their question, the WKCC cooperated with Oregon Wild last year and hosted some of the sessions where people identified the rivers that went into the Wyden bill. So it's time now for us to do step 2 of actively supporting that bill. And so if there are any members who are interested in writing to Wyden or doing some of the things that Zach talked about, now is the time to do that.
And right now we're in the thanking phase of Wyden. It's like, thank you. And he needs that. So he knows that we appreciate it. If nobody thanks him, he was like, why am I doing this? And if he only has people upset with him, he might slow down on it. But if he gets an overwhelming thank you, he'll push this harder, which is important to me. So Graham, I see your question about the Indigo. Indigo flows into the Illinois. And the Illinois flows into the Rogue downstream of Foster Bar. Ken's writing, when numbers count when writing a letter, communicating with the senator, suggesting a group letter from WKCC. Yeah, I think that's great. Personally, I do feel like, and this is just an opinion, and I don't understand. I'm not a member of WKCC, so I don't know how it works. Paddling groups need to be careful to not get too political sometimes, because that can take over the organization. And so I feel sometimes it's good if paddling groups are focused on safety and getting people out, and if once they go down a political path, that could cause other problems down the road. And I don't know if that's the case or what, but I would maybe suggest it's up to whatever WKCC wants to do, but I don't think the mission is river conservation. So it's almost better if groups that do river conservation write those letters. But it certainly would be appreciated if WKCC did.
And Dave Peterman, our president, wrote a letter in support of the bill, but more is needed. Elise, you have a hand up? And Elise, you are muted. Let's see if I can unmute you.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Great talk. And I have a bunch of questions, but maybe I can contact you later.
Ask them now, because everybody has probably the same questions. So go for it.
Okay. Well, I wondered if you knew Paul Fritzy, but I mean, that's kind of personal. But in the lower Snake, I have this cabin up at Hoodoo, and I've been, the electrical utility is CECC, the Central Electric Co-op, out of Sisters in Redmond. And I've been getting emails from them about advocating against Governor Brown's litigation to take out in response to the federal, I don't know, you call it the federal decision to refuse to take out the 4 dams on the lower Snake. And I just wanted to get more informed about that and want to know why Governor Brown, it looks like SOS, that Save Our Salmon group, is involved in this. I was reading stuff about that last night. And I just want to get better informed about, what's some good sites to get some, not the advocacy so much as the actual scientific evidence for, whatever water temperature affecting salmon, what the dam's removal would do to that, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, about that.
We could spend another hour on this topic.
I know, sorry.
And I don't even know much. I just barely know anything about it, and I could spend an hour on it.
Okay.
In my opinion, this is the biggest topic of our time, conservation-wise. I can't think of anything bigger.
Yeah.
I mean, and if you don't know this, Representative Simpson from Idaho, who's a Republican, just put forward a massive, not a bill, but it's a plan.
Yeah.
It's a bill, which is the biggest thing that's happened on the removal of the 4 Snake River dams of all time. And he was quoted, and I'm rephrasing one of his quotes that I heard, that he said, if we do nothing, let me rephrase it, he said this: if we take out the 4 Snake River dams, I can't guarantee that the salmon and steelhead won't go extinct.
Right.
But if we do nothing, I will guarantee they will go extinct.
Yeah.
And so that to me framed it. It's like, this is something we have to do.
Yeah.
The salmon and steelhead are so important not for economies, because there's fishing guides, but also for these ecosystems in Idaho. It's a keystone species to everything else, right? So this is a big deal. It's the biggest issue. It's so complicated. What I do know is that there are the Bonneville Power Administration it's a government organization that doesn't want it removed, and they're pushing pretty hard. I don't know how to phrase this correctly, but they're putting out a lot of stuff right now that's against this. They really don't want this to happen, but a lot of other people really want it to happen, and it's key for the fish. The place I would go to learn more is Congressman Simpson's website. He has a whole website on this. That's where I would go to learn more, and his plans there. And I know the Idaho Outfitter and Guides Association is super engaged on this right now, and it's a group of outfitters, but they're putting a lot of time and resources towards this. And I'm guessing on the IOGA website, ioga.org, there's a bunch of information too.
Okay, thank you. I also have another question. Do people pack craft much on your favorite river area, like the southwestern Oregon? And I mean, you didn't show pictures of that so much maybe, but I would think these little creeks and things that are kind of you hike into would be fun to do that. I
mean, the Chetco is sort of like the premier pack rafting run in the West to a lot of people. It's like, it's where it's at. People do the Illinois at low water in the summer a lot in pack rafts, although there's no hike in, so you don't need to. But there's so much opportunity for pack rafts down there. It's a mecca. I just don't pack raft myself, so I don't need photos.
Okay, thanks.
Zach, can you hear me?
Yep.
One of your early slides showed all those sections on the overall picture in Oregon. It looked to me like there was a vast number down in the lower right corner that were in Idaho. So,
Yep.
is that correct? So,
Yeah.
so Idaho is part of the same bill. Those Idaho.
Those already passed. Those ones are passed already. And so the map was all the rivers that are already wild and scenic. And those specific ones, most of those are part of a 2009 bill. The omnibus bill that did all the Mount Hood stuff also did a ton in Idaho. And that's the upper reaches of the Oahe. And I believe the Bruno and the forks of the Bruno were in that as well.
So are the laws for that group and Oregon group basically the same?
The laws, ask that question a different way. I don't understand.
Well, the laws that they have to abide by, and their qualifying laws.
Wild and scenic, yeah.
They're all wild and scenic. They're all defined by the wild and scenic. So they all are protected from dams.
I mean, both states are using the same.
It's a federal law. Yep, it's the federal law. So it's the same law that designates them, the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act. And they're all protected from dams. But the key is each river is protected differently based on its outstandingly remarkable values. So each river has a different management plan. And so the rules and regulations of the rivers are different based on those outstandingly remarkable values.
Thank you.
But it is the same federal law.
So just on that note, identifying the rivers is kind of like step one, and then getting it passed would be step two, and then getting involved in the development of the management plan with whatever agency is leading that is step three, and then fourth would be, continuing to advocate for management and funding of managing the rivers. We have some other hands up. How about Ken?
Thank you, Terry. Excellent presentation, Zach. I just wanted to reinforce to the group how a letter or contact with the senator works. Some years ago, more than 10, I owned a newspaper in Tule, California. I had about 3,500 circulation, and a local guy, Nick Macy, won his division of the Reno air races. So we covered that, and it was kind of a big deal. Of course, Nick had done it like 4 or 5 times before. But within 3 weeks, we received a letter at the paper from Senator Barbara Boxer, the state senator for California at the time, to please forward to Nick Macy. And as I understood it, they may not read the letter, but they have interns who do. And anything, as Zach said, if their name shows up or if it's in their district, it hits that senator's desk. So I just want to reinforce that part of what Zach said. They pay attention. They really do. Thank you.
And I know for a fact that Senator Wyden, if his name is mentioned in anything in the paper, he reads it. I don't know about everybody else, but I know for a fact Senator Wyden, if his name is mentioned, he reads it. Ken, just to follow up, I see your comment about a letter push. I think I don't know much about the club, but a letter push would be great. If everybody individually wrote letters, that's great. And the club writing a letter is great too, because you could say we have 500 members who are, active members, and it has a lot of weight if the club does write a letter. But doing both is great too. And somebody wrote that, Mark. Yeah, access. Yep. It depends what the mission of the club is. I see Barbara writes, one of the club's 5 goals is to help conserve, preserve, and protect flowing rivers of Oregon. So that's a no-brainer. So to me, it's a no-brainer to have the club. write a letter from the club.
All right, any other questions? Elise, it looks like you're about ready to ask a question. Go for it.
Oh, well, I've been on the computer all day because I'm looking for raft trailer. So that's been on the mind. Anybody know of anybody selling a raft trailer for Moravia Willow too? Anyway, that's irrelevant, but.
Could you stand up?
All right, Ken, did you have another question?
Yeah, I know you've been hit in the past, Zach, in your area, but we had a lot of fires up here in both the McKenzie and the Santiam drainages. You showed one picture, I think it was of the Smith, where a fire had gone through. Chetco bar fire, I thought you said it was.
It was a Chetco.
Yeah. Didn't have a lot of wood in it. We are in dire need. I mean, I just, in the people I talk with in the club, you know, of info on the rivers in those drainages. Have you heard anything? Thank you.
Oh, the McKenzie drainages?
Mackenzie and Santiam.
What was the question?
About access to them.
A wood report.
A wood.
Yeah, I don't know anything. That's a region I don't spend much time. I think Priscilla knows something about that, but I don't know much about it.
Vicky or Al have a question.
Hi, this is Al. I really liked your presentation. I have not seen all those rivers and that sort of thing, and it's great to see that. My question is that Wyden is already convinced. The people who need to get convinced now are the other senators and the House members, so that you get a law. And is there any way to sort of spread the stuff around than just sending stuff to Ron? Because as I say, he's convinced. Any thoughts?
Yeah, Senator Merkley was a co-sponsor, so or co-introduced it, was not co-sponsor, but Senator Merkley introduced it with him, so he's done. My representative Bence is probably going to oppose it, but I'm going to push him as hard as I can, although he'll probably oppose it. I think the biggest person who's maybe on the fence would be Representative DeFazio. And so I think, you know, he's so powerful too, that if DeFazio got behind it, it would help a lot. And he should. But I think right now, and I think most of you live in, I'm guessing a lot of you live in DeFazio's district, or some of you do. But right now we're in the thanking Wyden phase. We're in, thank you, Senator Wyden. Thank you, you're the best. You're our Wild and Scenic senator. We're in that, he just introduced legislation. We're in the thanking phase. And then in a couple of weeks or a month from now, then we're going to go into our what's next phase. And that would be probably a pretty big push on Representative DeFazio, you know, and Blumenauer and Bonamici will, and I forget the other representative's name, who a lot of you are probably in his district. They'll probably be for. I know, I'm assuming Blumenauer will. But DeFazio will be the one that is maybe the trickiest.
I'm sure he'll be in favor of it. Okay, thanks.
Hopefully.
Yeah.
He has historically did a lot. He was involved in a lot of stuff historically. In my experience lately, he hasn't been as supportive of conservation issues. So he'll need a push, I think. But I don't know for sure. That's just my experience.
Okay.
And I have had a similar experience with him. So, yeah. So, any other questions?
I see some in the chat. I'll go through really quick if that's okay.
Perfect.
So, to have a website or a blog that I post reports. I have this website, whitewaterguidebook.com, and I don't post trip reports very often. I try to do river descriptions. So instead of, I don't write about like my experience as much as I'm like, here's the research I did, here's the put in and the takeout, and sort of where the rivers are. So for me, that would be whitewaterguidebook.com. And the paddle Smith in California, the Smith I paddle a lot. It's probably it's one of my favorite places. It's the Smith is amazing. I love it there. And then
Gotta go there.
what was that?
This is Celia. I'd love to go paddling on the Smith.
It's special. I don't go that much anymore because I live in Hood River now and it's really far away. But I love paddling there. Katie B writes there's a website that has wood reports. It may be a link on the club site. That's good to know. And yeah.
All right, great, thanks. And I apologize, my video is no longer working, so you just get a picture of my kids. And at this point, I'd just like to thank Zach for his presentation and spending time with us. So yay, thank you. Big round of applause for Zach.
Thank you.
Oh, look at, we got little clapping hands in the chat.
Thank you, everyone.